intelligent young woman, it promised to be a fate worse than death. Morrison cleared his throat again. "Please pay attention to me, Lady Gwen," he said. "I still have to cover the aftermath of the rebellion in the colonies." "I am paying attention to you," Gwen said. She gave him a smile that should have chilled his blood. "You're very interesting to watch." "I just said that you had a leg growing out of your chest," Morrison said, with some irritation. "I thought you were being metaphorical," Gwen said. Her smile widened to the point where Morrison looked away, unable to meet her gaze. There was a reason Gwen hadn't been allowed to go to school, even the expensive finishing schools that turned young ladies' brains into mush. Her father knew better than to turn her loose on other young ladies, or tutors who couldn't devote all of their time to her. "It was an interesting parable to the case of the Americans." "It was not," Morrison said hotly. He was only a year or two older than her, but he was already schooled in not allowing his betters to irritate him. It was just a shame that he hadn't met anyone like Gwen before. "You're not paying attention to me." Gwen sighed inwardly and drew on her powers. Her skin seemed to glow with bright light before flames appeared around her, illuminating her body. Morrison stumbled backwards in shock, one hand reaching for the decanter of water before he caught himself. To someone utterly unfamiliar with magic, it would have looked as if Gwen had spontaneously burst into flames. The heat would scorch the chair, the table, and Morrison himself if he got too close. He stared at her for a long moment and then almost ran out of the door. Gwen watched him go, slowly pulling the magic back inside herself. It wasn't his fault, she told herself, even though part of her felt a guilty thrill at how she'd scared him half to death. He was just her mother's tool in the endless battle to turn Gwen into a proper young lady, one who could make her mother proud. But a life spent as the wife and helpmeet of a suitably aristocratic young man was Gwen's worst nightmare. She pulled herself to her feet and headed over to the desk. Morrison had left his books behind him, and she opened one of them at random. At least he hadn't been that bad a history teacher. History was also not a subject for young ladies, but her mother had reluctantly agreed to allow her to study it in exchange for an hour's practice with the harp every day. Music was the thing in high society these days, and a young woman who could play was assured of finding a husband, or so Lady Mary believed. Gwen doubted that anyone could play the harp well enough for a prospective husband to overlook her other failings. The book was written in dull tones, somehow sucking the excitement out of the Anglo-Spanish War of 1799, yet Gwen was midway through a description of the Battle of Cuba when the door burst open and Lady Mary stormed into the room. Gwen's mother had the same blonde hair as her daughter, but where Gwen was slim, her mother was alarmingly fat and energetic. Lady Mary had always said that she'd married beneath herself, even if Lord Rudolph had been an up-and-coming politician in government. The Under-Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs wasn't exactly a powerless post. "Gwen!" her mother snapped. "What did you do to poor Henry?" Gwen sighed inwardly. Her mother always brought out the worst in her. "I was bored, Mother," she said sardonically. "His lessons were driving me insane." "And you will drive me insane," her mother snapped back at her. "How do you think you will get a good husband if you keep doing that?" "Most of the men you have introduced me to are cads of the first order," Gwen said, imitating the tone her brother had used during his teenage years. Like most aristocratic men, he'd spent them gambling, drinking, and whoring, although Gwen wasn't supposed to know about the whoring. At least her brother knew better than to try to lord it over her, no matter what the church said about the duties of a sister to a brother. "I would sooner marry a muckraker than any of those weak-chinned vagabonds with titles." Her mother purpled. "And you'd be lucky if you married anyone," she said tartly. "It is not right in a respectable society for a woman to practice magic." Gwen's eyes flashed, and she felt the familiar pain behind her eyes.